The rain had started again, a thin, relentless drizzle that blurred the city lights into watery halos. Inside the small, dimly lit cafe, a man sat alone by the window, his gaze locked on the street outside, where passers-by hurried under umbrellas. His name was Julian, and though he appeared unremarkable in the grey jacket and worn shoes, the turmoil inside him was anything but ordinary. Across the table sat his friend Mark, an eternal optimist with a penchant for giving advice, the kind of advice that sounded sweet but felt hollow. "You just have to be kinder," Mark said, his voice calm but insistent. "Be the nice guy. Women appreciate honesty and gentleness. You just haven't been yourself." Julian smiled thinly, the gesture more a mask than warmth. "Yeah, the nice guy thing," he muttered, the words bitter. "I've tried. Believe me, I have. I'm the guy who opens doors, listens endlessly, never raises his voice." He let out a sigh heavy enough to fill the small room. "But it never works. You want to know why?" Mark shrugged. "Maybe you just haven't met the right person yet." Julian shook his head, voice dropping low. "It's not about them. It's about me, about what people want to see. I'm tired of being the nice guy who gets walked over. I'm tired of the polite smile that's never returned. I'm tired of being invisible." Mark looked uncomfortable, but pressed on. "But isn't it better to be kind than to be cruel? That's what everyone says." Julian's eyes darkened, the faint light, catching the sharp edge of his expression. "Kindness," he said slowly, "is a weapon only if you wield it with power. Otherwise, it's a leash. What people call cruelty is often just strength that refuses to be ignored." The cafe's small bell jingled as the door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and a few more wet souls escaping the rain. Julian watched the moment, as if measuring the weight of the world beyond the glass. "Look," Julian said, voice firming with a quiet fire. "All this advice about being nice, patient, and understanding is a mass society forces on us. But underneath, there's a truth no one wants to admit. People don't respect softness. They respect force, the force that commands attention, even if it scares them." Mark blinked, caught off guard. "That sounds harsh." Julian smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Harsh? Maybe. But it's real. Nietzsche said it best. The will to power is the core of all things. You think the world cares about being nice? It doesn't. It rewards those who impose their will, who create meaning through strength. The rest are shadows, forgotten and dismissed." Mark leaned back, rubbing his temple. "So what do you want? To be ruthless? To crush everyone who crosses you?" Julian's laugh was dry, almost bitter. "Not crush, no, but to be seen, to be recognized, to stop bending and breaking under the weight of others' expectations, to embody something real, something undeniable." Outside, the rain softened to a gentle patter, and the cafe seemed to shrink, the two men contained in this small bubble of tension and truth. Mark looked at Julian, the light in his eyes flickering between skepticism and curiosity. "And you think that's the secret? To stop being the nice guy and start being the powerful guy?" Julian nodded slowly. "Not just powerful, authentic. The nice guy is a role, a disguise that masks fear. The powerful man is someone who owns himself fully, who doesn't apologize for his desires or needs." A silence settled, heavy but charged, the kind of silence that forces thought deeper than words can reach. Then Julian leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to echo in the small space. "This isn't about manipulation or cruelty for its own sake. It's about reclaiming something lost, the right to be more than a footnote in someone else's story." Mark's gaze sharpened, sensing something profound beneath the surface. Anger. "Sounds like a revolution," Julian smiled, a slow curve of lips that promised both challenge and revelation. "It is. The revolution of the self, and it starts by tearing down the lies we've been fed." The city outside moved on, indifferent to the quiet drama unfolding within the cafe. But for Julian, everything had shifted. The old scripts, the tired roles, the endless chase for approval, all were cracks in a facade he was ready to shatter. His eyes met Mark's again, steady and unflinching. The truth is, no one owes you kindness. No one owes you anything. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop begging for scraps and start taking what's yours. Mark's breath caught, the weight of those words sinking in. And what about love? Compassion? Julian's answer was calm, resolute. Love isn't weakness, but it's not a leash either. True compassion comes from strength, from a place where you are whole enough not to need validation. You can't give what you don't have. The rain outside slowed to a stop, the streetlights flickering on like watchful eyes. Julian's face softened, but the fire remained. The world rewards power, but it's not power over others. It's power over yourself. Mark nodded slowly, the old advice feeling fragile now, as if a new paradigm was being born in this small, rainy cafe. The night stretched on, and somewhere deep inside Julian, the first embers of change began to glow. The kind of change that doesn't ask for permission, doesn't apologize, and never settles for being invisible. A week later, Julian stood in front of his mirror, the same mirror that had witnessed countless half-hearted affirmations and forced smiles. But this time, there was no mantra, no pretense, just silence. And in that silence, something ancient stirred. Not rage, not arrogance, but a quiet defiance that pulsed like a second heartbeat. He had started reading Nietzsche again. Not the cherry-picked quotes slapped onto social media feeds, but the raw, unapologetic texts. Beyond good and evil, thus spoke Zarathustra, even the fragments. The unfinished thoughts, jagged and brilliant, like shards of broken glass. There was one idea that had rooted itself in Julian's mind and refused to leave, the inversion of morality. That goodness, as most people understood it, was not virtue, but submission. That what society called evil was often just power, stripped of its politeness. Julian saw it everywhere now, the subtle chains disguised as compliments, the way people smiled while keeping him in his place, the way nice guys were praised for being safe, only to be ignored, passed over, left behind. He thought about every time he'd swallowed his opinions to avoid conflict, every time he'd offered softness hoping for love in return, and instead received polite distance or, worse, bored indifference. The worst part wasn't rejection, it was invisibility, and Nietzsche had named that sickness slave morality. A morality built not on self-creation, but on resentment, on a desperate need to be liked, to be validated, to be told you're enough, without ever risking the act of becoming something more. That night, Julian walked into a bar he'd avoided for months. It wasn't his scene, loud, crowded, full of the kind of men who carried themselves like they owned the air, the kind of men he'd once mocked as arrogant but secretly envied. He didn't wear a smile. He didn't try to appear approachable. He simply stood, tall, composed, silent, watching, not hunting, not proving, just being. He saw a woman standing by the counter, half listening to a man with a voice too loud and jokes too easy. Julian didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. But when the moment opened, when her glance slipped sideways, bored and distant, he stepped forward, not with the desperation of a man hoping to be liked, but with the presence of a man who did, not fear being disliked. He didn't ask her name right away. He didn't compliment her dress. He said, "That man doesn't interest you, not because he's rude, but because he's predictable. Am I wrong?" She blinked, caught off guard, the air shifting almost imperceptibly. "That's a bold guess," she said, raising an eyebrow. Julian nodded once. "I don't guess. I observe." She smiled then, not out of politeness, but curiosity. The dynamic was already different. He hadn't asked for permission. He had created tension, not comfort. And tension, he'd come to realize, is not the enemy of connection. It is its birthplace. They talked for 20 minutes, maybe 30. Then she left with her friends. No numbers exchanged, no promises. But that wasn't the point. The point was, he hadn't disappeared. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about removing everything false. The smile that begged for approval. The voice that softened out of fear. The posture that said, "I hope I'm enough." He remembered Nietzsche's warning. He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. And it clicked. Even in shame, there is still a strange form of power, a shadow version of strength. But the Übermensch, the higher man, seeks something greater. Not shame, not fear, not appeasement, but creation. The power to define values rather than inherit them. In the weeks that followed, Julian did something radical. He stopped apologizing. Not in the arrogant way of men who mistake cruelty for strength, but in the deeper, quieter sense of a man who no longer kneels for scraps. He didn't qualify his ideas. He didn't preface his thoughts with, "I could be wrong, but..." He didn't play small to make others feel big. And slowly, the world began to respond differently. At work, people listened when he spoke, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't retreat from silence. In conversation, he didn't rush to fill gaps. He let them widen, unafraid of discomfort. And others leaned in, drawn by the gravity of someone who no longer chased approval. He wasn't always liked, but he was finally felt. One afternoon, after a tense meeting where he had calmly dismantled a senior executive's flawed proposal, a colleague pulled him aside. "You're different lately," she said, eyes narrowed in something between suspicion and respect. "You used to be softer." Julian smiled, not with mockery, but with calm certainty. "No, I used to be smaller." The truth, as he was coming to learn, wasn't always pretty, but it was magnetic. People sensed when a man had stopped performing, when he no longer needed their applause to validate his existence. They called it many things: confidence, dominance, even arrogance. But beneath all the labels, it was something older, something Nietzschean. Not a man obsessed with winning others, but a man who had won himself. The cold winds of Saxony did little to chill the fire growing behind Friedrich Nietzsche's eyes. He had been a sickly child, often confined indoors, surrounded by silence and the scent of decaying books. His father, a Lutheran pastor, had died when Nietzsche was just 4. The image of the stern, pious man lingered in his mind like a ghost, even as his own thoughts began diverging from the faith he was raised in. There, in the quiet desperation of illness and isolation, a seed was planted. A relentless, burning desire to understand the real pulse of human nature, stripped of illusions. As a young man, Nietzsche's brilliance was undeniable. By 24, he had been appointed professor of classical philology at Basel, the youngest ever to hold the post. Yet even as he taught the structure of ancient languages, his mind was already reaching far beyond the brittle pages of Greek grammar. He was fascinated by the tragedies of Aeschylus, the raw blood of myth, the ecstatic fury of Dionysian ritual. He saw in those violent, passionate expressions something more authentic than the tidy sermons of modern Europe. Nietzsche lived during a time when the Enlightenment had calcified into a new orthodoxy, one that worshipped reason, progress, and polite morality. The old Christian God was dying, but the ethics he had commanded were still alive, walking through European culture like a well-dressed corpse. Kant had drawn sharp lines between right and wrong. Hegel had wrapped history in tidy dialectics. And everywhere, people seemed eager to play their part in a rational, orderly world. But Nietzsche saw rot beneath the order. He watched as men with hollow eyes followed rules they didn't believe in, spouting virtues they had never tested. He smelled the fear behind their politeness, the fear of chaos, of instinct, of the unfiltered human will. He began to suspect that much of what passed for goodness was nothing more than obedience masquerading as virtue. His early work, The Birth of Tragedy, already hinted at his coming revolt. He contrasted the rational, measured spirit of Apollo with the wild, intoxicating energy of Dionysus. For Nietzsche, true human greatness lay not in restraint, but in embracing both forces, the clarity of form and the madness of life. The Greeks, he believed, had understood this once, but modern man had forgotten. He had chosen comfort over ecstasy, safety over truth. Nietzsche did not write like a professor. His words did not explain, they struck. He didn't argue so much as provoke, seduce, and unsettle. His style, aphoristic, fiery, riddled with irony, mirrored his philosophy. Truth, for Nietzsche, was not a set of propositions, but a dance with danger, a constant becoming. This refusal to stabilize, to settle into fixed categories, was the heart of his break with moral binaries. Nietzsche rejected the neat division of the world into good and evil. He believed this split was not universal, but invented, a product of historical trauma and resentment. In Beyond Good and Evil, he tore into this legacy. The morality we inherit, he argued, is not timeless truth. It is the morality of the weak, of those who, lacking power, had to vilify it. When the strong, noble, and assertive once ruled, they named their own instincts, pride, ambition, strength, as virtues. But when the weak were conquered, they could not fight back directly. So they waged war through values. They called their submission humility. Their fear became obedience. Their resentment of the strong was recast as righteousness. This inversion of values, the turning of life-affirming instincts into sins, is what Nietzsche called slave morality. This was not a conspiracy, but a deep psychological shift. A defensive maneuver that over centuries became culture, religion, even identity. He saw it most clearly in Christianity, which he called the revenge of the weak, not because he hated spiritual life, but because he saw how it taught people to scorn their own strength, how it painted self-mastery as arrogance, desire as shame, will as sin. This revolt against binaries was not moral relativism. Nietzsche did not believe all values were equal. He simply believed values had to be created, not inherited. That the highest task of a human being was to forge meaning, not to obey it. And this forging required a dangerous kind of honesty, the courage to admit that what we call kindness is sometimes cowardice, that niceness often hides need, that peace can be just another form of fear. In Nietzsche's world, human magnetism could not be faked. It did not come from following rules or avoiding offense. It came from power, not over others, but over the self. The power to say what one really thinks, to want what one really wants, to shed the mask, even if it terrifies those around you. He introduced a new figure to embody this power, the Übermensch, or overman. Not a tyrant, but a creator. Someone who lives beyond inherited categories, who doesn't need permission to exist, who makes his life into a work of art. The Übermensch does not ask, "What should I do?" but rather, "What can I become?" He is not trapped by guilt or the need to be liked. He acts out of abundance, not lack. Nietzsche never claimed to be this man. He merely pointed toward him, carving a path through the wreckage of old values. And though the world misunderstood him, some branding him insane, others twisting his ideas into political slogans, his insight cut deeper than mere rebellion. He was not trying to destroy morality. He was trying to free it from fear. What he offered was not a license to be cruel, but a challenge to be real, to stand without crutches, to dare to live without guarantees. The deeper one reads Nietzsche, the clearer it becomes that his rebellion was not against ethics per se, but against borrowed ethics, those values one adopts not from inner conviction, but from a desire to belong, to be safe, to be seen as good in the eyes of others. He believed such values were inherently castrating. They dulled instinct, sapped vitality, and created a culture of mediocrity where strength had to apologize for existing. He saw this tendency not just in religion or academia, but in the very tone of modern life, its bureaucracies, its slogans, its obsession with politeness. Even democracy, to Nietzsche, represented a kind of lowest common denominator morality, one that prized equality over excellence, consensus over courage. What masqueraded as progress was, in many cases, just a more efficient form of herd control, and the modern man, so proud of his enlightenment, was often nothing more than a timid animal in well-tailored clothes. What Nietzsche wanted was not cruelty, but hierarchy, not imposed from above, but drawn from within. A natural, internal scale of value where a man could say, "This is higher, this is lower," not because I was told so, but because I have seen it, felt it, become it. He admired those rare individuals who lived according to their own rhythm, who didn't flinch in the face of judgment, who carried their solitude like a crown. And here, Nietzsche's relevance to human magnetism becomes unavoidable. The magnetic man, the one others feel before they hear, does not try to please. He is not measured by how agreeable he is, how softly he steps around the discomforts of others. His presence is disruptive because it is unfiltered. He is not governed by the norms that restrain the average. He has stepped beyond good and evil, not into chaos, but into authorship. That does not mean he is reckless. On the contrary, he may be gentle, even tender, but never apologetically so. His gestures are deliberate. His speech is unhurried, not because he is calculating, but because he is unconcerned with being understood by everyone. He does not shrink from silence. He does not mask his intensity. People sense that they cannot manipulate him through guilt or praise, and this generates something few can name, but all can feel: gravity. Nietzsche knew that to live this way required solitude, not loneliness, but a kind of radical self-trust that most people never touch. In his notebooks, he often returned to the idea that greatness is forged in isolation, not because society is evil, but because society, by its nature, rewards sameness. The man who seeks to create his own values will be called dangerous, arrogant, insensitive, and he must learn not to flinch. Nietzsche's own life reflected this tension. He spent most of his years wandering, half-blind, racked by migraines and stomach pain, often writing in bursts of manic clarity. He fell out with friends, lovers, publishers. He died before his time, alone, insane, misunderstood. And yet, in those years of exile, he carved insights into human nature that remain volcanic to this day. He predicted, long before it became fashionable, that the 20th century would be an age of nihilism, an age where the old gods had died, but no new values had emerged to replace them. He called this the desert of the real, a landscape where meaning must be created from scratch, without divine templates. And in that desert, Nietzsche insisted, the strong would not merely survive, they would create. This act of creation was, to him, the ultimate human task. And it had nothing to do with titles or achievements. It was a daily discipline, a way of being. To shape oneself like a sculptor shapes marble. To reject what is easy. To affirm life even in its cruelty. To say yes to existence, not from comfort, but from courage. To walk this path meant embracing a different kind of struggle. Not the struggle for dominance over others, but for integrity within oneself. It meant listening to instincts long buried under shame. It meant standing alone when applause would be so easy to chase. It meant replacing the desire to be liked with the desire to become whole. Nietzsche's revolt against moral binaries was not a call to destroy boundaries, but to build new ones forged from awareness, not obedience. It was an invitation to stop asking, "What will they think of me?" and begin asking, "What do I think of myself when no one is watching?" And in that shift, from external to internal authority, a strange transformation begins. Others sense it. They may not understand it, but they react to it. Some with awe, some with fear, some with quiet envy, because they are still trapped in the polite labyrinth of shoulds and should-nots, while you have found the way out, not by escaping, but by refusing to play. It is here that Nietzsche's critique of slave morality stops being philosophy and becomes embodiment. You stop living for harmony and start living for truth. You stop asking if you're good enough and start asking if you're real. You stop hiding the blade of your will under layers of charm and instead let it gleam, not to wound, but to illuminate. This is not easy. It will cost you friendships, opportunities, comfortable illusions, but it will also give you something rarer than approval: presence, the kind that makes rooms pause, the kind that doesn't need to shout or impress, the kind that simply is. And perhaps this is what Nietzsche saw all along, not just the downfall of old gods, but the birth of new ones, not gods of thunder or grace, but of grounded, dangerous clarity, men who no longer ask for meaning, but become it. The kind of presence that Nietzsche admired, the unflinching, self-possessed gravity of the Übermensch, did not arise from chance or charm. It was not a product of physical beauty, social skill, or learned behavior. It stemmed from something deeper, a pulse beneath the surface of personality, the will to power, not a lust for domination, as is often misunderstood, but a more primordial drive, the silent force behind creation, intensity, and attraction itself. For Nietzsche, the will to power was not just a human impulse, it was the fundamental engine of life. Everything living, he wrote, strives not merely to survive, but to expand, to express, to shape reality according to its inner logic. Plants twist towards sunlight, animals stake territory, artists give form to chaos, thinkers carve patterns. Out of doubt, all of it, whether soft or brutal, nurturing or destructive, is will to power in motion. It wasn't about cruelty, nor was it about hierarchy for its own sake. Rather, Nietzsche saw all life as a constant surge toward more life, toward expression, toward command over one's own conditions. Even weakness, he argued, is often a disguised will to power. It strategizes, manipulates, seduces, reframes. The difference is not in having the will, but in how it is expressed. In the average person, this will is buried, suppressed beneath moral codes, social pressures, and internalized shame. People are trained to want safety, to want validation, to want to be nice. But beneath that lies a much older fire. The craving not just to be accepted, but to assert, to shape, to radiate. Most simply, never admit it. They confuse humility with hiding, politeness with self-erasure. And yet, you can see the will to power flicker in moments of unguarded desire. When someone speaks with uncompromising clarity, when someone moves without seeking permission, when someone walks into a room and seems unbothered by how they're perceived. That is not arrogance. That is not performance. It is alignment, an interior engine unblocked. This is where the magnetic force begins. People are not drawn to you because you smile at the right moments or mirror their body language. They are drawn to something in you that refuses to chase, refuses to explain, refuses to apologize for existing. Something in you that burns without waiting for a match. They might not understand it. They might even resent it, but they will feel it, viscerally, involuntarily. And that sensation is not mysterious. It is biological. We are wired to sense power, not brute force, but orientation, direction, self-command. The person who has transmuted their will to power into presence does not need to seek attention. Attention organizes around them, not because they manipulate it, but because they've stopped leaking energy. They are no longer signaling lack. Nietzsche understood that this presence was not merely about external confidence, it was existential. To embody the will to power meant to affirm your instincts rather than stifle them. It meant moving through the world without constantly deferring to others' narratives. It meant being able to want without asking for permission to want. This is why he considered the will to power a more accurate lens than good and evil. Because it starts from what is, not from what should be. It asks, what do I feel? What do I desire? What am I avoiding? Not to indulge every urge blindly, but to become aware of one's inner economy. To harness it instead of deny it. And this awareness is magnetic. The person who knows what they want, who knows their own hungers, fears, and contradictions, and does not flinch from them, becomes rare. Not because they are perfect, but because they are unhidden. Their presence vibrates with reality. You don't have to agree with them. You can even dislike them, but you cannot ignore them. That quality, inescapability, is what Nietzsche saw in figures like Caesar, Goethe, and even Jesus. Not because of what they preached, but because of how completely they embodied a vision, each in their own way, reshaped the world through the sheer intensity of their will, not by overpowering others, but by refusing to be divided within themselves. Their outer influence came from inner congruence. You can feel the opposite just as clearly. Someone who smiles too much, who filters every sentence, who is nice in a way that doesn't land. Something in you recoils, not because you are cruel, but because part of you senses the void beneath the mask. There is no will, only reaction, only performance. And even if they are liked, they are rarely felt. Nietzsche did not want us to become tyrants. He wanted us to stop outsourcing. Our energy, the will to power, as he saw it, was not a justification for control over others, but a call to reclaim authorship, to stop living according to inherited stories, to stop castrating our will just to be comfortable. And here, perhaps more than anywhere else, the gap between nice and magnetic becomes clear. The nice man is always asking, is this okay? Do you still like me? Am I enough yet? But the magnetic man no longer negotiates with ghosts. He knows what he offers. He knows what he wants. And if it's too much for some, he doesn't shrink. He expands. This expansion is not about ego. It's about alignment. The will to power, properly understood, isn't an act of ego inflation. It's the shedding of fragmentation. It's the refusal to keep fracturing oneself into palatable pieces. You stop diluting your desires to fit a mold. You stop chasing praise like a starving animal. You begin to move as though you carry something. Because you do. When Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, he wasn't describing a cartoonish alpha figure. He was describing someone who had reintegrated their instincts, who had made peace with their contradictions, and who now stood whole. Wholeness is not always clean. It is not polite. It doesn't always say the right thing. But it is felt, and that feeling changes the atmosphere. The room doesn't bend to his will, it bends to his presence. That's what happens when the will to power is no longer leaking out as resentment, appeasement, or overcompensation. It begins to concentrate. It moves through your gestures, your silences, your stillness. People notice the unspoken. They pick up on the fact that you don't fill awkward silences. Not because you're trying to prove a point, but because you're not uncomfortable with the weight of your own being. That weight is attractive, not because it tries to be, but because it doesn't try at all. This is the paradox Nietzsche understood better than most. True power does not need to announce itself. It does not demand recognition. In fact, it often operates beneath language, beneath the polished surface of self-presentation. It emerges when one stops performing strength and begins embodying it, and people can feel the difference. It's why you can meet someone who's accomplished everything by conventional standards and still feels hollow. You can feel the twitching insecurity beneath the suit, the constant hunger to be admired, the subtle panic of being exposed. That's not power, that's scaffolding. Remove the status, the applause, the external cues, and the structure collapses. Contrast this with someone who carries a quiet, almost animalic certainty. They might not say much, they may not have the accolades or the script, but something in them doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't flinch. That's not arrogance. That's the will to power in its mature form. Not spectacle, but substance. And this substance radiates, especially in attraction, because human chemistry is not just about looks or compatibility. It's about frequency. When you've stopped needing from others what you haven't given yourself, your frequency changes. You no longer broadcast anxiety disguised as niceness. You stop pulling. You start emanating. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. On the contrary, your emotions become sharper, but you are no longer enslaved to them. You can desire someone deeply and not collapse into desperation. You can face rejection without self-erasure. You can hold your ground without turning cold. This centeredness is rare and magnetic precisely because it's rare. Nietzsche's will to power is not a metaphor. It is a felt reality. The more you step into it, the more you sense where you've been deferring your authority. In every conversation, every decision, you'll begin to notice, am I leading from center or from lack, from expression or compensation? You'll catch yourself shrinking to avoid conflict. You'll catch yourself exaggerating to be liked. And in those moments, you'll begin choosing differently. Not because someone told you to, but because you've tasted the alternative. You've felt what it's like to not apologize for being, and that experience rewires you. It makes you less reactive, less available for manipulation, less invested in being understood. You don't stop caring. You just stop contorting. You don't stop connecting. You just stop performing. And this shift makes others either uncomfortable or deeply drawn in, because they're seeing something that reminds them of what they've lost. Some will try to provoke you, to test the edges. Others will be quietly inspired. Some will retreat. Some will orbit. But all will feel it, that you are not waiting for their approval to act, to speak, to want. That you are not outsourcing your sense of okayness to their moods or opinions. That you are, in a word, sovereign. Nietzsche saw this sovereignty not as a static state, but a constant becoming. The will to power is not a destination. It's a daily attunement, a moment-to-moment refusal to abandon yourself. It shows up in how you walk, how you hold eye contact, how you say no without explanation. Not because you're trying to prove something, but because you no longer feel the need to. And when you meet another who is doing the same, someone whose presence is also grounded, whose will is also uncloaked, the connection does not collapse into codependence or performative harmony. It becomes alchemical. Attraction becomes less about validation and more about recognition. You are not halves trying to complete each other. You are whole forces encountering. There's tension, yes, but it's clean, not laced with manipulation or hidden agendas. There is room to be fierce, to be flawed, to be real. And that realness draws others in, not through tactics, but through transmission. Because in a world addicted to masks, someone who has burned theirs becomes unforgettable. If the will to power is the engine, what then is the terrain it moves across? What invisible structure shapes who is desired and who is ignored, who commands the room and who fades into it? This, Nietzsche never charted directly, but his provocations, scattered like sparks through his texts, point toward a hidden symmetry, a law unspoken, not because it is mystical, but because it is too plain, too impolite, too brutal for polite company. Most people never discover it. They don't need to. They stay within the script they were handed, mistaking social coherence for magnetism. But those who unsettle the room without trying, who radiate attraction even in silence, they've stumbled into something else. They obey a different code, one that does not reward approval-seeking or niceness or emotional overexposure, one that rewards orientation. What Nietzsche quietly revealed was that attraction is not an exchange, it's a recognition of force. Not always sexual, but always electric. And that force, contrary to modern myths, does not arise from compatibility, common interests, or emotional availability. It arises from tension, from asymmetry, from the polarity between two self-possessed centers that do not collapse into each other. Attraction, at its rawest, is the friction between presence and pull. It is never about ease. It is not found in agreement. It emerges in the space between what someone is and what someone else cannot access. It lives in the unsaid, the unpossessed. The secret Nietzsche leaves for those willing to read beneath. The surface is simple. Attraction depends on resistance, not surrender. Kindness, when untethered from presence, is not attractive. It's compensatory. It feels like a transaction. Here's my warmth, now like me. But desire cannot be negotiated. You cannot give your way into someone's bloodstream. What captivates is not what you offer, but what you withhold without apology. Not out of cruelty, but out of gravity. This is where Nietzsche's unspoken law begins to take shape. Presence is not about occupying space. It is about emanating from the inside out, refusing to flinch or perform. Command is not dominance. It is unshakable self-reference. Polarity is not game-playing. It is the inevitable distance that exists between two whole people who do not seek fusion. Together, these three, presence, command, polarity, form the triangulated structure beneath all real magnetism. They do not require manipulation. They are not learned techniques. They are natural consequences of a psyche that has ceased begging to be chosen. And once activated, they shift everything. Presence is the end of self-division. It's when your inner voice no longer contradicts your outer expression. It's when you are not narrating yourself in real time, wondering how you are being perceived. Presence has no angle, no agenda. It is not loud. It is not aloof. It simply is, and that is its power. Command emerges not from control over others, but from mastery of self-orientation. The one who commands is not reactive. They do not betray their own rhythms to maintain comfort. They can say no without flinching. They do not chase. They do not plead. They do not punish. Their yes is real because it is never desperate. Polarity is the space that desire needs to breathe. It is the refusal to collapse into sameness. It is the maintenance of edges, not to create distance, but to sustain tension. Polarity does not mean being opposites. It means staying sovereign even in closeness. It is the crackle of presence, meeting resistance, not submission. This is the secret law, that magnetism does not arise from harmony, but from charge. That the most compelling individuals are not those who dissolve conflict, but those who embody it gracefully, who can carry contradiction without apology, who can pull others in not by promising safety, but by radiating depth. And the variables beneath this law are not esoteric. They are entirely observable, though few dare to observe them without flinching. The first is orientation. Where is your center of gravity? Are you grounded in your own instincts, or do you outsource your value to how others react? People can sense this instantly. If you walk into a conversation subtly seeking reassurance, subtly angling for acceptance, your energy bends, you shrink, you adapt, you dissolve. But if you remain oriented toward your own center, even while listening deeply, your presence commands. The second is tension. Do you tolerate it or rush to neutralize it? Every time you fill a pause, every time you soften your words to avoid discomfort, every time you over-explain a boundary, you leak power. Not because kindness is wrong, but because unanchored kindness betrays your own position. The one who can hold silence without collapse, who can remain warm without over-accommodation, is rare. And that rareness draws others in. The third is opacity. Do you leave something unclaimed? Do you allow space for others to reach for you? Or do you spill yourself entirely at once? People confuse transparency with intimacy. But overexposure too early kills polarity. The truth is, we are most drawn to what we cannot quite name. Mystery is not manipulation. It is the dignity of keeping your inner world uncolonized. These three, orientation, tension, opacity, are not tactics. They are outcomes of a psyche that no longer begs. They are the echoes of a self no longer split. They are what remains when you stop using kindness to mask self-erasure. And yet, there is something maddening about this law, because it cannot be faked. The moment you try to use it to get someone to like you, to notice you, to stay, you've already lost it. The posture becomes a performance and the center collapses. That's the brutal elegance of this principle. It is only accessible to those who no longer need it to work. Which is why so many misunderstand attraction. They think it can be engineered through techniques, optimized like a strategy. But no trick sustains the kind of gravity that this law demands. Because the law is not about crafting a persona. It is about shedding the need for one. This is what Nietzsche meant when he called for the re-evaluation of all values, not the rejection of love, connection, or vulnerability, but the burning of false currency, the exposure of moral masquerades, the destruction of what he called slave morality, the system of internalized self-betrayals we perform to stay acceptable, likable, safe. But safety kills voltage. Comfort sterilizes polarity. The law Nietzsche implied does not reward the most agreeable. It rewards the most alive. Those who've reconnected with their own inner chaos, not to be reckless, but to stop hiding behind order. It is this wild coherence, not politeness, that creates magnetism. Because something in us recognizes it. Something in us lights up in the presence of someone who is not bracing, not flinching, not managing our perception of them. Someone who walks into the room as though they are not performing an identity, but simply inhabiting one fully. That's the real secret. The people who draw others in don't radiate perfection. They radiate truth in motion. And truth, when it stops apologizing for itself, becomes radiant. Of course, this makes most social dynamics unbearable to witness once you've seen it clearly. You'll begin to notice the subtle ways people trade, authenticity for approval, the smile that lasts too long, the compliment that has a hook, the laughter that waits for permission, and you'll feel a kind of nausea, not judgmental, but weary. Because once you've tasted real presence, your own or another's, everything else starts to feel like noise. And this doesn't make you antisocial. It just makes you allergic to falseness. You can still love deeply, still connect, still feel. But you won't collapse. You won't orbit around others hoping to be chosen. You'll no longer bleed power for crumbs of recognition. This is what Nietzsche's law offers. Not tactics, not tricks, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you've stopped outsourcing your orientation. When your no is no, longer hesitant. When your presence doesn't ask for validation. When you can walk away, not out of coldness, but out of wholeness. And the result is not aloofness. It's warmth without need. It's intensity without volatility. It's desire without desperation. And that rare alchemy, command paired with depth, is what turns a passing moment into something unforgettable. Others may not be able to name it, but they'll feel it, because this kind of presence wakes people up. It startles something asleep in them. Not always pleasantly. Sometimes it confronts them with what they've buried. But even then, they'll remember you. Not because of what you gave them, but because of what you refuse to hide. This is the true center of the secret law. Not seduction, not manipulation, but a quality of being that says, I am not asking to be chosen. I am choosing myself, here, now, fully. And in that choosing, others are moved, not because you ask them to be, but because something in them recognizes what they've long forgotten in themselves. It is not a game. It is not a pose. It is not learned. It is remembered. Most people, sensing the gravity of another's presence, will explain it as charisma, or chemistry, or sometimes just an ineffable vibe. But this language hides a more primal truth. We are wired, from the deepest layers of the brain outward, to respond to hierarchy. Long before we understood the word power, we knew how it felt. And the moment someone stops needing to be liked, We feel it. Not through logic, not through overt behavior, but through shifts in body language, voice tone, eye contact, pacing, and the rhythm of pauses. These signals bypass language. They register in the limbic system, where social safety and threat are processed. And it is here, not in the realm of conscious analysis, that Nietzsche's law begins to assert its pull. Modern neuroscience offers clarity on this. The amygdala, often simplified as the brain's fear center, plays a larger role in social hierarchy detection. When we enter a room, our brains immediately begin scanning. Who leads, who follows, who yields, who holds. This process is ancient, designed to navigate tribal dynamics where survival often hinged on reading power accurately. And the cues we read, subtle shifts in posture, voice modulation, gaze steadiness, are the very manifestations of presence and command. But even beyond the amygdala, there's another layer at play. Research in effective neuroscience shows that dominance activates a distinct neurological pattern. Studies using fMRI have found that exposure to dominant individuals, those who occupy more space, speak deliberately, and signal certainty, activates regions associated with reward and attention. In short, we are not just observing dominance, we are neurologically drawn to it. Yet this doesn't mean brashness or aggression creates attraction. Quite the opposite. Dominance in this context is not about loudness or control. It's about certainty without apology. And the more someone is rooted in that orientation, the more others attune to it, without ever realizing why. This is where the science catches up to Nietzsche's instinct. His critique of herd morality wasn't a philosophical abstraction. It was a recognition that people obey invisible social currents far more than they admit. And those currents are shaped not by explicit moral logic, but by energy transmission, at the level of nervous system to nervous system. There's a concept in interpersonal neurobiology called limbic resonance, coined by Dr. Thomas Lewis and his colleagues. It refers to the way emotional states synchronize between people. If someone enters a space calm, centered, and self-assured, those near them unconsciously begin to mirror that state, not because they choose to, but because human brains are designed for emotional alignment. And this is the secret of presence. It is contagious, not because it projects power outward, but because it regulates others by simply being unmoved. This is what makes someone magnetic, not the stories they tell, not even their looks, but the nervous system state they occupy and how it reshapes the room around them. You can feel this when someone walks in with real gravity. Conversations shift. People lean slightly toward them. There's a pause, a recalibration. Even those unaware of what's happening will find themselves subtly adjusting their posture, their tone, their attention. And they won't know why. But neuroscience does. The autonomic nervous system, particularly the vagus nerve, plays a critical role in regulating social engagement. Someone with high vagal tone can remain calm and grounded under pressure, which sends unconscious cues of safety and stability to others. This physiological regulation creates emotional arousal, not of panic, but of alert presence. The body wants to be near whatever calms it without needing it. This is the paradox at the center of Nietzsche's law. Those who don't seek attention often command the most of it. Not because they withdraw, but because they remain energetically unmoved by whether others approve of them. This concept of being unmoved is not about coldness, it's about coherence. Psychological studies on social dominance frequently confuse assertiveness with aggression, but what's often missed is that true authority is felt most deeply when it's not reactive. In fact, reactivity is the surest signal that someone is not in command. The minute a person scrambles to correct, to explain, to soften their presence, their status drops, not in the minds of others, but in their bodies. And this is where all real perception of power begins. Consider the principle of reciprocity in social psychology. We're neurologically primed to return kindness, favors, attention. But this reciprocal instinct functions differently depending on status. When someone higher in perceived power gives attention, it's thrilling. It feels like a gift. When someone lower in perceived power gives attention, it's expected. It feels like a bid. This asymmetry is brutal, but it's real. And it's not personal, it's neurological. According to Dr. David Buss and other evolutionary psychologists, this dynamic traces back to primal mating behaviors. Power, in its various forms, social, physical, psychological, signals access to resources and safety. Attraction, then, isn't always about compatibility. It's often about advantage. But here's the twist. Advantage doesn't have to be real. It only has to be perceived. And perception, as we've seen, is governed by energy more than logic. You can have money, looks, status, but if your nervous system is broadcasting need, others will sense the mismatch. Conversely, someone without any of those external markers can radiate undeniable pull simply because they're not broadcasting anything at all. They're still, rooted, silent inside. This is why Nietzsche's law resists simplification. It's not that kindness is weak. It's that kindness without center is repelling. A person who pleases from emptiness will drain those they try to attract. But a person who is kind without yielding, giving without performing, becomes almost disorienting. In their effect, others won't know how to place them, and in that confusion, they become unforgettable. Neuroscience calls this cognitive dissonance, when someone violates our expectations in a way that forces the brain to reconcile conflicting impressions. A man who is gentle but unshakable, a woman who is warm but refuses to self-minimize. These contradictions command attention, not through shock, but through pattern interruption. And attention is the first gateway of attraction. Once attention is captured, emotion follows. And emotional arousal, whether positive or even slightly anxious, is the engine of memory and desire. This is why people fall for those who challenge them more often than those who simply support them. The nervous system craves regulation, but the mind craves novelty. The ideal combination, the magnetic sweet spot, is someone who brings both. The psychologist Dan Hill, in his work on facial coding and emotional arousal, found that micro-expressions of interest and surprise were most closely correlated with attraction. Not just smiles, not just mirroring, but the subtle jolt of a nervous system disrupted. This, again, is where Nietzsche's law reappears. The person who refuses to contort for others becomes a source of this disruption, not because they are difficult, but because they are rare, and in this rarity they shift the social frame. They move from being one among many to a fixed reference point. Others orient around them. This isn't manipulation. It's an emergent phenomenon. When someone stops adjusting, they become the thing others adjust to. In social dynamics theory, this is called the frame. Whoever controls the frame controls the emotional tone of an interaction. And the one who controls the frame is not the loudest, the cleverest, or even the most attractive. It's the one who believes their reality the most deeply. Nietzsche would argue that this is the will to power in action, not domination, but the creation of reality through sheer internal conviction. And what we now know from psychology is that this conviction is what others find irresistible. People don't follow certainty because it's right. They follow it because it's stabilizing. In a world of ambiguity, someone who refuses to question themselves becomes an anchor, and anchors create polarity. This is how the science closes the loop on the law. Emotional arousal, social perception, and neurological reward systems all favor those who carry themselves with unapologetic coherence. And that coherence can't be faked because the body always gives it away. Which brings us back to where we began. Attraction is not something you do, it's something you emit. And what you emit is not built from effort or performance. It's built from nervous system calibration, internal clarity, and the subtle refusal to collapse. This, in essence, is the biological footprint of Nietzsche's principle. Not a theory, not a tactic, but a total orientation of being that rewires how others respond, even before a single word is spoken. What begins in the nervous system must end in practice. It's not enough to understand why presence generates pull or how dominance rewires perception. Knowing it intellectually changes nothing if your body still flinches, still explains, still seeks validation. If Nietzsche's secret law is to move from idea to embodiment, it has to live in your bones, and that means ritual. The nervous system is not a thing that listens to thought, it listens to repetition. This is why change doesn't happen through insight, but through calibration. It's not about becoming confident, it's about teaching the body to feel safe while holding tension, emotional, social, or energetic. Only then can coherence become your default, not your performance. So the first discipline is stillness, not inaction. Stillness, a daily, deliberate practice of silence without stimulus. 10 minutes, no music, no scrolling, no speaking, just sitting. Why? Because it forces confrontation with the very anxiety that drives performance. The body wants distraction. It wants to do something to avoid the unbearable feeling of just being, which is exactly why this is the first ritual. If you can't sit with yourself without reaching, you can't lead others without grasping, you will chase attention to avoid your own void, and that is the opposite of presence. The second practice is eye contact, not as a performance, but as calibration. Every day, choose 3 interactions where you sustain eye contact a second longer than is comfortable, not in defiance, not as a game, but to retrain your tolerance for direct energetic exchange. The eyes, neurologically, are one of the highest bandwidth channels of emotional communication. When you hold someone's gaze with calm steadiness, their mirror neurons begin to adjust to your state. This is not mysticism, it's measurable, but it only works if you're grounded. That leads to the third practice, somatic grounding. This can be as simple as barefoot walking on natural terrain, or 5 minutes of breathwork each morning with attention placed on the soles of your feet and the base of your spine. The goal is to remind the body, every day, that safety does not come from the mind. Safety comes from the sensation of being in the body, and a person who feels safe in their body becomes the nervous system that others unconsciously seek out. You'll notice a pattern forming here. Every practice targets the nervous system before behavior. That's because true gravitas isn't built through tricks, it's built through state, and state is always upstream of action. But behavior matters too. Once your internal calibration begins to shift, it must be expressed through patterns, and this is where daily protocols come in. The first behavioral protocol is deliberate delay. In any moment of social or emotional tension, before you speak, respond, or react, wait 3 seconds. This trains impulse control, but more importantly, it creates space, and space is what allows energy to gather. If you react instantly, you discharge all tension, but when you wait, others lean in. They anticipate. That anticipation becomes magnetism. You can practice this everywhere. In text messages, wait before replying. In conversation, pause before answering questions. In moments of praise or criticism, let there be a beat of silence. These are micro-calibrations, but over time, they retrain others to feel your presence before your words. That reversal changes everything. The second behavioral protocol is economy of speech. This doesn't mean being cold or withholding. It means cutting the performance out of your language. Every day, choose one conversation where you say 20% less than you normally would. Remove filler words, explanations, unnecessary justifications. Speak like someone who believes they're already understood. Because the truth is, people don't remember what you said. They remember how they felt in your presence. And that feeling is shaped more by your energy than your eloquence. The third protocol is boundary signaling. This is where kindness and power merge. Begin by identifying one area each day where you habitually yield, whether it's overcommitting, softening your tone to avoid tension, or tolerating disrespect. Then, take one small action of resistance. Not defiance, not confrontation. Just one clean no, or one clear pause, or one refusal to self-abandon for the sake of ease. The goal isn't to become rigid, it's to become trustworthy to yourself. Because the nervous system doesn't build confidence from success, it builds confidence from self-alignment. When your body sees you consistently honor your own limits, it stops scanning for threat. That creates the stability others feel before they ever hear your words. Beyond internal calibration and behavior lies communication, the vehicle through which your newly forged presence is expressed and tested in the social arena. Here, the mastery blueprint insists on subtlety rather than spectacle, nuance rather than noise. The first communication tactic is the calibrated tone. Notice how people who command attention rarely raise their voices or fill silence with chatter. Instead, their tone is measured, lower, slower, and more deliberate than average speech patterns. This is not just style, it's physiological. The human voice is tied to the autonomic nervous system. A calm, steady tone signals emotional regulation, reliability, and safety. Conversely, a hurried or high-pitched voice triggers tension and distrust. Daily practice involves recording your voice during a simple reading or conversation and listening back with curiosity. Notice where your pitch spikes or your rhythm hurries. Then, deliberately slow and deepen your voice for a few minutes each day, both to retrain your vocal muscles and to retrain your nervous system's emotional baseline. This tonal practice is the audible echo of the stillness and grounding rituals you already do. Next comes strategic use of silence in conversation. Silence is often mistaken for awkwardness or failure, but when wielded intentionally, it becomes an instrument of influence. When you allow silence to settle, you create an invisible pressure on the other person to fill the gap. This compels them to reveal more, to step closer emotionally, or to submit to your pace. Practicing this means resisting the urge to immediately answer questions or react to statements. Instead, hold the silence with confidence, like a pause in music that heightens anticipation. Another essential tactic is narrative brevity paired with emotional resonance. Rather than lengthy stories or exhaustive explanations, practice telling short, vivid anecdotes that evoke feeling rather than facts. The goal is not to inform, but to imprint. Emotional resonance creates memory pathways, and those pathways map to desire and influence. Choose one story each day, something simple but meaningful, and practice telling it with emotional clarity and minimal detail. Let listeners fill in the blanks with their imagination, which deepens engagement. Non-verbal communication is equally vital. The subtle art of controlled gestures, slow, purposeful hand movements, open postures, and relaxed but upright carriage speaks volumes without words. Your body language needs to align with your internal state to avoid sending mixed signals. This is why mirror exercises help. Spend 5 minutes a day observing your posture and expressions, adjusting them until they feel relaxed yet authoritative. Over time, this attunement between inner state and outer expression becomes seamless, the physical manifestation of your presence. One of the most powerful yet overlooked communication habits is what I call anchoring. This means planting consistent, reliable cues in your interactions that others come to associate with your presence. It might be a particular phrase, a specific gesture, or a rhythm of speech. Anchors serve as psychological magnets, subtle triggers that activate the emotional imprint you want to leave behind. Practice this by choosing one anchor per week and using it intentionally in conversations until it becomes natural. The mastery blueprint also requires vigilance against the temptation to please. Kindness without boundaries, we have seen, becomes invisible or repelling. Therefore, cultivating an internal mantra to maintain your own emotional economy is crucial. This mantra might be as simple as, "I am enough as I am," repeated silently, whenever you feel the pull to over-explain, apologize, or diminish yourself. This daily internal dialogue reshapes subconscious patterns and fortifies the energetic frame you present. Finally, the blueprint culminates in daily reflection and recalibration. Each evening, spend 10 minutes reviewing your interactions. Notice moments where your presence felt authentic and magnetic, and moments where you slipped into need or performance. Reflect not with judgment, but with curiosity. What nervous system, cues shifted? What behaviors supported your power? What communication tactics landed? This reflective ritual completes the loop, bringing awareness to unconscious patterns, reinforcing what works, and gently redirecting what doesn't. It is through this iterative process that Nietzsche's law transforms from an abstract principle into a lived reality. Taken together, these rituals and habits compose a comprehensive system that rewires your internal and external worlds. They allow the mysterious magnetism Nietzsche described to emerge naturally, not as a tactic, but as a state of being. This state, once embodied, radiates irresistibly, activating desire in others not through effort or artifice, but through authentic, grounded presence. Despite the clarity of a blueprint and the power of disciplined rituals, the path toward authentic presence is rarely linear. There are traps and temptations that threaten to distort the law's true essence, replacing genuine magnetism with shallow mimicry or worse, counterproductive behaviors. These pitfalls are not failures, but natural hurdles on the journey, each carrying a lesson if met with awareness rather than shame. The first and most frequent misstep is toxic aggression masquerading as power. In this distortion, the vibrant tension that fuels attraction is replaced by brute force or intimidation. It's the loud voice that drowns conversation, the cutting sarcasm that severs connection, the relentless pursuit of control that breeds resistance rather than desire. Here, power becomes coercion, and presence is overshadowed by fear or discomfort. This confusion often stems from a misunderstanding of Nietzsche's concept of the will to power. Will to power is not about dominating others externally. It is about cultivating inner strength and self-mastery that naturally influences the environment. When this principle is reduced to mere dominance, it backfires, triggering defense mechanisms in others and eroding the subtle dance of polarity that fuels attraction. The remedy begins with humility and self-awareness. If you find yourself defaulting to aggression, pause and ask, is this behavior born from confidence or insecurity? Is it an expression of my authentic self or a mask to hide fear? Slowing down, grounding, and reconnecting to your internal state can dismantle aggressive tendencies. Practices like breathwork and somatic grounding recalibrate the nervous system away from fight-flight and toward presence. Another common pitfall is passive resignation, the opposite but equally damaging distortion. Here, the individual surrenders agency, believing that kindness and compliance alone will generate attraction. This leads to people-pleasing, avoidance of conflict, and a lack of clear boundaries. Instead of magnetic tension, there is depletion. Instead of polarity, there is flatness. This passive mode often arises from cultural conditioning, trauma, or a fear of rejection. It's the nice guy trap Nietzsche sought to dismantle. The well-intentioned desire to be liked can paradoxically create distance because it lacks the contrast and command that stimulate desire. Without polarity, connection fades. Countering resignation requires reclaiming your voice and re-establishing boundaries. Start by practicing small acts of refusal or self-prioritization. This might be as simple as declining a request that drains you or expressing an honest opinion in conversation. These micro-boundaries train your nervous system and those around you to recognize your self-respect, which paradoxically invites deeper connection. The third pitfall is performative dominance, acting the part of power without internal alignment. This can look like exaggerated confidence, flashy displays, or calculated charisma. Unlike authentic presence, which feels effortless, performative dominance is a performance fueled by insecurity and external validation. It's the mask of power that cracks under pressure. This disconnect is often the result of impatience, wanting results before the internal groundwork has been laid. It might bring short-term attention, but it cannot sustain magnetism. Over time, performative dominance breeds fatigue, inconsistency, and mistrust in relationships. The antidote is patience and authenticity. Real power is slow, subtle, and deeply embodied. Rather than pushing for results, focus on small, consistent daily rituals that ground your state. Reflect regularly to detect when you're slipping into performance. Authenticity is not perfection, but alignment, showing up as you are, even when imperfect. A fourth frequent error is confusing polarity with manipulation. Some try to engineer attraction through deliberate emotional push-pull, calculated scarcity, or forced jealousy. While these tactics might mimic polarity superficially, they rely on deception and external control. This breeds instability, anxiety, and eventual disconnection. True polarity arises naturally from self-possession and emotional clarity. It does not depend on controlling others' responses, but invites them to engage freely. To course correct, shift attention inward. Cultivate emotional honesty and presence, rather than strategizing interaction. Let polarity be a natural consequence of your energetic integrity, not a tool of manipulation. Misreading kindness as weakness also undermines presence. Nietzsche's critique is often misunderstood as an injunction to harshness, but genuine power integrates compassion without self-abandonment. Kindness that stems from strength creates openness and trust. Kindness from neediness invites exploitation. Strengthen this balance by differentiating your intentions. Before acting kindly, ask, am I giving because it aligns with my values, or to gain approval? Practice generous acts without expectation, reinforcing internal rather than external validation. This practice roots kindness in power rather than passivity. The final pitfall is neglecting the ongoing process of reflection and adjustment. Without continuous awareness, even well-meaning practitioners can drift into old patterns, losing sight of authentic presence. This drift manifests as reactivity, inconsistency, or diminished magnetism. Embedding reflection rituals ensures steady course correction. Regularly review your emotional states, behaviors, and social feedback with curiosity. When dissonance arises, treat it as a signal rather than failure. Adjust your rituals and protocols accordingly. Remember, mastery is iterative, not a destination. Taken together, these common pitfalls reveal the delicate balance required to embody Nietzsche's law authentically. Power misapplied repels. Power denied disappears. Power performed fades. But power, grounded in self-awareness, humility, and ongoing practice, radiates irresistibly. Having explored the common missteps that obscure Nietzsche's law of attraction, it becomes clearer how delicate the balance is between authentic power and its distortions. To bring these abstract principles into vivid relief, consider how they play out in the lives of three individuals from distinct spheres, each facing the challenge of presence, magnetism, and influence in their own modern context. First is Eleanor, a startup founder navigating the cutthroat world of tech entrepreneurship. When she first launched her venture, Eleanor believed that relentless hard work and agreeable collaboration would be enough to win over investors and partners. She embodied the nice entrepreneur, always accommodating, endlessly patient, and cautious not to ruffle feathers. Her team appreciated her kindness, but often found her indecisive, and investors perceived a lack of conviction. Meetings drifted without clear direction, and despite her expertise, her startup struggled to attract critical funding. Elena's experience embodies the pitfalls of passive resignation and performative dominance. She had the knowledge and vision, but lacked the internal gravitas and confident presence necessary to activate desire and trust. In contrast, her rival, a competitor founder, radiated a quiet command, decisive, poised, and unapologetically authentic. This competitor didn't dominate aggressively, but held space firmly, embodying the will to power as an internal engine rather than external. Showmanship. Recognizing this gap, Elena began a disciplined practice aligned with the mastery blueprint. She worked daily on grounding rituals, breathwork, and vocal tonality, slowly cultivating an unshakable inner center. She practiced holding silence during pitches, allowing space for others to engage rather than rushing to fill it. Over time, her tone deepened naturally and her communication gained clarity and resonance. The transformation was striking. At the next investor meeting, Elena's presence captivated the room. Investors noted not just her ideas, but the energy she brought, the confidence that inspired belief. Her team rallied with renewed enthusiasm, drawn to her leadership that was both firm and compassionate. Within months, her startup secured critical funding and partnerships, a success attributed as much to her magnetic presence as to the product itself. Contrast this with her earlier approach, where her kindness, without boundaries, diluted authority, and her eagerness to please sapped her power. Elena's story demonstrates how activating Nietzsche's law authentically can shift not only outcomes, but also one's internal experience, transforming anxiety and self-doubt into grounded confidence and influence. Next, turn to Marcos, a creative artist struggling with self-expression in the saturated world of digital media. Marcos's work was brilliant, but often overlooked. He had learned to be likable, to avoid controversy, and to accommodate audience expectations, believing this would build his following. However, his social media engagement was lukewarm, and gallery invitations were sporadic. Marcos's dilemma illustrates the consequences of confusing kindness with weakness and polarity with manipulation. His audience sensed a lack of polarity. No tension, no contrast, just bland pleasantness. Without that energetic magnetism, desire waned. Attempts to mimic charismatic personas backfired, appearing performative and inauthentic. A breakthrough came when Marcos encountered Nietzsche's principle of presence as command. He embraced the discomfort of authenticity, allowing his true voice to emerge, even if it risked alienating some followers. He stopped performing for approval and started sharing stories that were raw, complex, and unapologetically personal. He adopted rituals to ground his nervous system before live streams and exhibitions, maintaining presence over performance. The impact was immediate and profound. His audience grew, not just in numbers, but in engagement. Comments shifted from polite applause to passionate dialogue. Galleries sought him out for the emotional power his work conveyed. Marcos's authentic presence created polarity, inviting some in deeply while naturally filtering out others, aligning him with the right kind of desire and respect. Marcos's journey underscores the necessity of internal alignment and emotional honesty in cultivating attraction. The law is not a formula, but a state of being that evokes response through integrity rather than manipulation. The final example comes from Claire, a public speaker aiming to influence large audiences in corporate and educational settings. Early in her career, Claire relied on rehearsed charisma, carefully crafted smiles, practiced gestures, and scripted enthusiasm. While polished, her talks often felt hollow to listeners, lacking the gravitas that moves people beyond passive reception to active inspiration. Claire's early approach reflects performative dominance without grounding, an echo of insecurity masked as confidence. Audiences sensed the disconnect, which dulled the impact of her message. Her nervous system was frequently hijacked by performance anxiety, undermining presence and diluting polarity. In response, Claire adopted a rigorous daily practice focused on internal grounding, somatic awareness, and recalibrating her nervous system. She learned to welcome vulnerability as strength, letting go of the need for external validation. Before each talk, she practiced mindful breathing and micro-meditations, centering herself in the present moment. This shift allowed Claire to speak from a place of embodied authority, where each word carried weight, not because of volume or style, but because of genuine conviction. Audiences began to respond with palpable energy, often reporting feelings of being seen and moved, rather than merely entertained. Claire's story illustrates the transformative power of presence rooted in authenticity. It confirms that Nietzsche's secret law is not about dominating through spectacle, but commanding through truth. Together, these stories highlight the law's profound implications across diverse domains. Whether in entrepreneurship, art, or public speaking, the principles hold. Presence, polarity, and command rooted in inner mastery activate attraction far beyond surface charm or performative tactics. Equally important, they reveal the cost of ignoring the law, missed opportunities, shallow connections, and stalled growth. The law is not a trick, but a fundamental dynamic of human interaction, ancient yet urgently relevant today. The stories of Elena, Marcos, and Claire reveal that Nietzsche's law operates not only in the arenas of ambition and public influence, but also in the most intimate realms of human connection. When applied to relationships, the law transcends mere attraction, becoming a dynamic force that deepens and sustains genuine bonds. Yet, this application demands nuance, balancing strength with vulnerability, managing the complexities of intimacy, and evolving the dance of desire beyond its initial spark. At its core, Nietzsche's law challenges the cultural scripts that equate kindness with weakness and power with dominance. Relationships, especially romantic ones, are fertile ground where these misconceptions manifest painfully. Many enter partnerships, hoping kindness alone will cultivate lasting love, or conversely, mistake control and dominance for passion. The truth lies in a more profound alchemy. Presence infused with emotional depth and polarity that honors both strength and tenderness. To begin integrating the law, one must first understand that authentic strength is not armor, but fluidity. It is the courage to be seen fully, flaws, fears, and all, while maintaining a grounded center. This strength creates a magnetic field that invites intimacy rather than repels it. Vulnerability, far from a sign of weakness, becomes a form of power when offered from this secure place. It signals trust and openness, essential for true connection. Consider the way this dynamic unfolds in conversation. When one partner speaks from a place of centered presence, their words carry weight not because they are loud or forceful, but because they emerge from a well of inner authority. Listening, too, becomes an act of strength, not passivity, but engaged attention that validates and reflects the other's experience. This reciprocal exchange deepens emotional resonance and creates polarity through contrast. The confident speaker balanced by the attentive listener, strength met with softness. Yet, sustaining this balance over time requires ongoing self-mastery and reflection. The initial thrill of attraction often hinges on polarity's energetic tension, but longevity demands evolving that tension into a dance of mutual growth. Here, Nietzsche's principle of becoming, continual self-overcoming, becomes vital. Partners must individually and collectively pursue growth, challenging complacency and fostering an environment where both feel seen and encouraged to expand. Navigating intimacy through this lens reveals new layers. Physical closeness, often laden with vulnerability, can either deepen connection or trigger defensive withdrawal. The law teaches that presence in these moments, holding one's own emotional space while attuning to the others, cultivates safety and desire simultaneously. It is a paradox of closeness that requires firm boundaries and open hearts. Boundaries preserve individuality and power. Openness invites trust and softness. A practical example is the ability to express needs and desires honestly without fear of rejection or domination. This clarity creates polarity, as each partner embodies distinct yet complementary energies, sustaining attraction beyond superficial charm. It also dissolves the toxic cycle of passive resignation or aggressive control that undermines lasting connection. Moreover, Nietzsche's law helps decode the emotional arousal underpinning attraction. Beyond physical or intellectual appeal, presence and polarity stimulate subconscious circuits linked to desire and attachment. When these energies are balanced and authentic, they create a feedback loop, reinforcing connection and intimacy. Partners become mirrors and catalysts for each other's growth, bonded not only by affection, but by dynamic energetic exchange. The challenge lies in maintaining this dynamic amid life's inevitable stresses and changes. Work pressures, family demands, and personal struggles can sap presence and disrupt polarity. Here, the mastery blueprints, rituals, and habits, breathwork, reflection, grounding practices are essential tools. Couples who cultivate individual presence bring renewed vitality to their shared space, resisting stagnation and deepening commitment. This ongoing commitment to presence and polarity also reshapes conflict. Instead of avoidance or escalation, disagreements become opportunities for deeper understanding and alignment. When each partner holds their power while staying open, conversations move beyond blame to authentic dialogue. The relationship thus evolves into a crucible for self-overcoming and mutual transformation. Ultimately, integrating Nietzsche's law into relationships means embracing complexity rather than seeking simplistic formulas. It requires courage to dismantle old scripts and step into a fuller expression of self, one that blends strength and vulnerability, command and softness. This integration does not guarantee effortless harmony, but promises a connection imbued with depth, passion, and resilience. In this way, Nietzsche's hidden principle reveals itself not as a cold doctrine of domination, but as a vibrant living force that fuels human connection at its highest level. It invites us to rewrite the story of attraction, not as a game of manipulation or pleasing, but as a sacred dance of presence, polarity, and authentic power. As we arrive at this final juncture, the threads woven through our exploration begin to coalesce into a singular, compelling invitation to embody Nietzsche's secret principle, not as an abstract theory, but as a lived reality. From the initial provocation that disrupted familiar nice guy myths, through the unraveling of moral binaries, to the deep dive into the will to power and its intimate interplay with attraction, the journey has revealed a hidden architecture of human magnetism that transcends surface-level tactics. Each step illuminated facets of this law: presence that commands attention, polarity that generates desire, and a mastery grounded in authenticity rather than performance. The case studies brought these principles alive, revealing how ordinary individuals transformed by reclaiming their inner gravitas and shedding performative masks. And when applied to relationships, the law showed its capacity to deepen connection, harmonizing strength and vulnerability into a dynamic dance that sustains attraction far beyond initial encounters. Yet, understanding is only the beginning. The path forward calls for deliberate embodiment, for making these insights your own through disciplined practice and continuous refinement. This is not a moment to rest on intellectual laurels, but to step into the ongoing work of becoming what Nietzsche so profoundly termed the overcoming of oneself. To this end, consider 3 interlocking avenues for further growth: advanced exercises, community engagement, and structured reflection. Advanced exercises move beyond the foundational rituals into nuanced territories designed to deepen presence and expand influence. For example, prolonged silence exercises challenge your habitual need to fill space, teaching you to hold energy without anxiety. Shadow work, another powerful tool, involves confronting and integrating your unconscious fears and limiting beliefs, those hidden forces that sabotage authentic power. These practices strengthen your nervous system's resilience and refine your capacity to command presence effortlessly. In parallel, deliberate play with polarity can be cultivated through role reversals and improvisational scenarios, heightening your sensitivity to energetic dynamics and sharpening your ability to shift fluidly between strength and softness. Such embodied exercises transform theory into lived experience, rewiring patterns at a somatic level. Yet, no individual journey thrives in isolation. Community engagement offers a vital container for shared growth and accountability. Surrounding yourself with others who are committed to Nietzsche's law creates fertile ground for feedback, encouragement, and challenge. Whether through small mastermind groups, workshops, or online forums, these connections provide mirrors to reflect your progress and catalysts to ignite further evolution. Within a community, you witness the law in diverse expressions, broadening your understanding and application. You also experience the magnetic pull of collective presence, a force multiplier that demonstrates the law's social dimension. Together, you practice holding space for power and vulnerability simultaneously, learning the delicate art of group, polarity that enhances influence without domination. Structured reflection completes the triad, grounding your growth in conscious awareness, regular journaling focused on key questions. Where did I feel most present today? When did I default to performative behaviors? How did I hold or lose polarity? Cultivates metacognition and self-honesty. Meditation practices centered on observing thoughts and sensations without attachment deepen your capacity for presence by quieting the mind's chatter. These reflective routines are essential for integrating new patterns and recalibrating when old habits resurface. They anchor the subtle shifts of transformation in lived reality, ensuring that progress is sustained and authentic. Taken together, these pathways form a holistic framework for embodying Nietzsche's law fully, one that transcends surface attraction, to forge a profound, ongoing alchemy of power, presence, and connection. But this journey is not merely about personal gain, it carries a broader significance. To embody this principle is to step into a form of leadership over yourself and in your relationships, communities, and spheres of influence. It is a call to live with unapologetic authenticity, to radiate a presence that magnetizes and inspires, and to forge bonds rooted in dynamic polarity rather than hollow niceties or coercion. In doing so, you not only transform your own experience of desire and connection, but also ripple outward, challenging and elevating the cultural narratives that have long equated kindness with weakness and power with domination. This transformation invites you to reclaim a more potent, integrated version of yourself. A self that commands respect through presence, invites desire through polarity, and sustains connection through vulnerability, grounded in strength. As you step forward, remember that the law is a living practice, not a fixed endpoint. It will demand continual attention, humility, and courage. Yet, it also promises the profound reward of magnetism that is both authentic and enduring, a power that does not diminish others but elevates all involved. May this invitation inspire you to embrace the challenge, deepen your practice, and participate in a growing movement of individuals embodying Nietzsche's hidden principle, a force reshaping the landscape of human connection and influence.